Yes. Oh, that was even fun. How are you doing? Wow, that's great. That's even better. So she didn't make a big deal, but she's like, walk out, That's wonderful. I'm so That's what you're going to do. Temptation. I can understand right here when she's having trouble. You know, of course you're not. That's absolutely true. It really is. It's not just the physical, it's the emotional.
Before we begin, if you are the owner of a blue Toyota, Dave Morkel has your keys.
Is that me?
Anyone?
Do I have mine?
Okay. After the service, Dave has your keys.
Or I'm driving it home.
Or he's driving it home. Good morning. My name is Megan Fenton, and I'm your worship associate this morning. Please rise in body or spirit and join us in singing hymn number 114, Forward Through the Ages.
Good morning. My name is Nora Mulligan, and I am the president of the Board of Trustees of this congregation. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley, and welcome to First Unitarian Society of Westchester. Whether you've been with this congregation a decade or more, or this is your first time visiting, we welcome you. Whatever the faith and traditions of your past, we welcome you. Whatever your theological stance, we welcome you. Whoever you are and whomever you love, we welcome you. Whatever your heritage, we welcome you. We respectfully acknowledge the territory on which our church building sits as the ancestral homelands of the Munsee, Lenape, and Wappinger people. I have two sets of announcements. First, for the UUCHV, the Building and Grounds Committee is looking for help in mowing the lawn over the summer months. If you can volunteer, please contact Chris Oliver or Betsy Tomic. Streaming volunteers needed. Streaming the Sunday live service is much less complex, as weekly setup and plugging in is no longer necessary. It requires minimal training. If interested, please get in touch with Chris Oliver or Gil Long. Summer services, as you may have guessed, begin this Sunday, June 25th. Please check the website and the back of the order of the service for the schedule of which services will be at our church and which will be at FUSW. During coffee hour today, the Arts Committee will announce the raffle winner of Joanne Hefner's beautiful painting, Croton Bay Sale. Now the announcements for FUSW. Sunday service on July 2nd, FUSW, on Zoom, not in person. Independence Day, the Declaration. Members of the First Friday Women's Group will lead us in the reading and discussion, along with music celebrating the holiday. Friday, July 7th, First Friday Women's Group meets for lunch at the home of Teresa Reynolds. Contact Teresa or Marilee for information. The FUSW board has established a new home committee for the purpose of searching for a more permanent home for FUSW. The committee is charged with conducting a search for appropriate rental property for FUSW that would include, along with space for worship, space for a kitchen, office, and storage space, and would provide a home for our piano. Any friends or members of the congregation interested in being included on the committee should contact Lenore Lupe, L-E-N-O-R-E-L at aris-comm.com. We urge all of you to stay informed of opportunities for connection by reading the scoop in your inbox each week. For the most up-to-date information on these topics and others, please refer to our weekly e-newsletter and check our website frequently. And please join us for conversation after the service. If you're present in the sanctuary, please come to the fellowship hall. If you're watching the live stream, the link for our Zoom coffee hour can be found in the Saturday reminder in your email. If you are just recently joining us and would like to receive our weekly e-news, please email us at uucroton@gmail.com with your name, and we'll make sure you're added to our e-news list. Also, please remember to silence your cell phones at this time. Once again, we welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley.
Today, we welcome back Lily Carayannis. She is an aspirant to the UU ministry, a graduate of Union Theological Seminary, and a member of the board of UU Faith Action, New Jersey. She works for the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, investigating allegations of police misconduct made against members of the NYPD. Welcome, Lily.
Good morning. Our invocation today is from chapter 46 of the Tao Te Ching. This is one of the oldest books in the world and a foundational text of Taoism. It contains deep wisdom that has reverberated through millennia. Now, the Tao can be difficult to read, and as is true with all sacred texts, it's difficult to parse. But I'm going to read this short section from two different translations, the first from Shaolin Yang and the second from Ursula K. Le Guin. In this section, the book contemplates that without the way or the Tao, which is the non-personal divine of Taoism, violence rules the world. And so I ask you as you listen to think about when the world doesn't feel right, or when it feels unjust or out of sorts, and to think of the ways that violence can spawn from that. With the way, horses are used for farming. With the way lost, horses give births in battlefields. No disaster is worse than greed. No fault is worse than desire. Therefore, one who can be easily satisfied will be always satisfied. In the second translation. When the world's on the way, they use horses to haul manure. When the world gets off the way, they breed war horses on the frontier. The greatest evil, wanting more. The worst luck, discontent. Greed's the curse of life. To know enough's enough is enough to know.
We now invite the children of the congregation and Jane Podell, our Director of Religious Exploration, to ring the bells 8 times for our 8 ethical principles. Today's chalice lighting words are from Václav Havel, adapted. We must divest ourselves of our egoistical anthropocentrism, our habit of seeing ourselves as masters of the universe who can do whatever occurs to us. We must discover a new respect for what transcends us, for the universe, for the earth, for nature, for life, and for reality. Our respect for other people, for other nations, and for other cultures can only grow from a humble respect for the cosmic order, and from an awareness that we are a part of it, that we share in it, and that nothing of what we do is lost, but rather becomes part of the eternal memory of being where it is judged. I now invite you to join me in our unison affirmation. The words are in your order of service. Inspired by love, our mission is to seek our true nature, connect deeply and openly, and act for justice. now sing the children out.
We'll keep our round going once together, and then 2 more times, and this group can start.
Let us now bear witness to the joys and sorrows experienced in our community. If you have a brief yet personally significant joy or sorrow that you are willing to share, please come up to the microphone and speak loudly so that everyone, including the people watching at home, can hear you. If you would prefer only to have a candle lit without speaking, please just stand and I will light a candle for you. And we have one to start. A candle of joy in celebration of FUSW's minister, Reverend Arlen Roy, who was honored at this year's General Assembly for his 50 years of service as a UU minister.
Hi, I'm Tina. It was a joy last night to join a group of folks to see the movie Past Lives at Jacob Burns Center. It is a movie about a Korean woman who has to emigrate at a young age, and she has a childhood friend, a crush, and it looks at the relationship to past and present. Very moving, and it was edited by our own Keith Fraze, who you may know as often wrangling 2 adorable little children, but he's also a very talented editor, so highly recommend going to Jacob Burns and seeing the movie.
Hi, I'm Sharon. The joy that I have to share is that I'm finally getting my knee replaced after waiting 3 years. The sorrow is that I won't be here the rest of the summer probably, but I'll see you in September. And thanks for welcoming me to the congregation.
Hello, I'm Pat Krugman. I have to share a great joy. Today is the first day I'm marching in the Pride Parade. I can't wait.
We also acknowledge the unspoken joys and sorrows held within the sanctuary of our hearts, and all those people who have yet to find a spiritual home where they too can share their joys and sorrows.
For the words for our meditation today, I'm going to read the words of author, poet, and spiritual teacher Pixie Lighthorse, who is an enrolled member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. Help me to speak out for justice with a special desire fueled by a power greater than surface comforts and outdated systems. Let me be a troublemaker to champion those I love and care for, and for those I don't know intimately who need my help. Hire me to be a powerful voice for the change that heals, reconciles, forgives, and improves. Help me create time and space to lend support where it is needed. Transmit to me the passion to be bothered by violations of another's rights of life, liberty, happiness, and their voice. Remove my feelings of hopelessness in what I perceive to be the opposition. Align me with action and channel my energy for others. Bolster my confidence and give me the understanding and empathy required for sustainable existence. Make tolerance my priority and give me the words and actions to fight violence with the sword of peace. Help me do my part to clang the bells of freedom. When 10,000 are whispering, make me one who is listening.
Today's reading comes from Ada Limon, The Frontier of Never Leaving. If the wound you cover is made of sheet metal, and the iron gates left over from the junkyard of the forever worried, and the school of always broken here, I have saved you a seat. If you have hidden your outlawed books in your mattress and your outlawed thoughts in your hands, here I will give you refuge. This is what I heard underneath it all, underneath and in the beginning, but now let's move to Canada. I hear it's nice, and they don't kill each other as often. I can even forgive them for speaking French. Really, not all of them speak French. But would I miss it? If I move to Canada, and there's no war in the spring, I won't miss Iowa, that's for certain. But it's the only thing. The fields keep growing longer like a veil between us, the mountains like sutures on the map, and yet they are ours, the way mustard can be ours off the highway, and windmills in the deserts, and roads, even roads. Barbed wire between us, fences between us. The roadrunner has run into the river, and misters, you do not care. Another puzzle piece of my American map has unfolded. I am the only thing that fits together here in this frontier of never leaving. Today, I'm going to play the record of the revolution. The less the flag will wave over you, and the more it will become a swallowtail and migrate to our houses, the little ones in the back, the ones with the lights in the window. Look, you can see them now, opening their doors in the fog. Now, please rise and body your spirit and join us in singing hymn number 126, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing.
To
In March of 2020, when the reality of the pandemic landed on the shores of New York City, and the world was at once scary and hopeful, the threat of overwhelming our medical system was ever present, but so too was that spirit of community care. At around that time, my spouse, Stacy, and myself coped the way that many of us did, watching way too much Game of Thrones or reading those books that we always had intended to read. We escaped into the fantasy of the world crumbling because there was dragons or necromancers, as that just seemed easier to deal with. And at one point, we were talking, and Stacy had this realization. Stacy was complaining about the misogyny and the constant trips to brothels in these fantasy series. And Stacy then said, well, you know, I guess at that time it was normal, and then stopped and said, wait, but what time? These are about a different world, not a different time. Why is it easier to imagine a world with dragons than it is to imagine a world without misogyny? So Stacy set out to write their own books on the fantasy books, set in the Wild West and replete with monsters and witches and lacking the casual trips to the brothel. But that inquiry also renewed our critical lens to our media. And it had us thinking, where else in what we read or watch or we engage with, what else engages with notions that seem to be reinforcing structures that don't ultimately serve the goals of justice and truth and the dignity of all creation? And as we did this, we kept coming to the same answer: a constellation of concepts that surround the idea of the frontier. The frontier. When we think of it, images of the Wild West often come to mind. We see the steam train, we see white men on horses hustling cattle, 6 guns, and all the rest. And while the Wild West seems to have cornered the market on frontier images, these ideas and beliefs underlying those images are ever present in our media. And I'll give you an example. There's a popular apocalypse show called The Walking Dead. Some of you know it. And it opens with a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a sheriff's star affixed at its center and a 6-gun strapped to his waist. And in this image, a show that is not set in the frontier West, it tells us that this is nonetheless going to be a show about the frontier. And so for The Walking Dead, it's a show about a society with no rules, no laws, just people living in and through violence. Not only the violence of the zombies who have brought this condition about, but the other humans too, who are fighting for finite resources, trying to rebuild a civilization. Now, The Walking Dead is a rather explicit example of a subtle set of concepts. The concept of the frontier is not just the forging into a new physical space that was heretofore not settled by white people. The concept of the frontier is not simply the fantasy of a world where the law has not yet been established. The frontier is not simply the fantasy of individuals holding distinct little parcels of property with only their will and their guns. The frontier is this core concept of the American identity, and its ideological power has the ability to sway policies and to build strange attractions between movements that, on paper, shouldn't be aligned. And so I'm going to take an example. Guns are a central symbol of frontier ideology. And I believe that we can only understand guns and America's culture of guns if we understand frontier ideology and vice versa. Guns in frontier ideology represent freedom, individualism, and regeneration. Freedom because the gun has come to represent that tangible, consumable product that frontier logic says is America's birthright. It is that which came second in the Bill of Rights to enshrine a person's right to protect their subsequent rights. First, we are free to say what we want. Second, we are free to protect what we say with force, or so one reading goes. Guns represent individualism in that they represent a person's right to enforce their justice as they see fit. This is often construed as protecting property, and we see it in the so-called, stand your ground laws. But it also means solving disputes in the moment without waiting for the slow and often frustrating path of the law. It's also a fantasy of being the law-bringing hero of your own story. And this is why so much of our media loves the gun. It creates drama based on the intrinsic quality of having a finger and an opposable thumb. Guns also represent regeneration. And this is subtle, but I think most important of all, especially as it relates to frontiers. The frontier, in the classical sense, refers to the process by which white Europeans violently killed indigenous people, stole their land, and converted that land into individual chunks of property to be owned and controlled by the very same white Europeans. Except they were no longer the same white Europeans. In that process, they transformed themselves into something new. They transformed themselves into an American, freed from the feudal bonds that bound and still bind the rest of Europe. Or at least, so the logic of the frontier culture goes. So these three things, freedom, individualism, and regeneration through violence, are a through line of American political and spiritual discourse, all part of the concept of the frontier, and all symbolized in and through the gun. And by understanding this, we can understand two things. The first is the persistence of guns and gun culture, despite the undeniable and devastating cost that such a culture has. And I'm not just talking about mass shootings, I am talking about the accidents and the suicides and the domestic disputes that rarely make the news. Second, it helps us understand the strange partnerships that have begun to emerge and take shape in the last 40 years. It helps us answer the question as to what ties together the trad wife movement with the hyper-capitalists of Silicon Valley, or the NRA and the police, who are often tasked with the results of the prevalence of gun violence. Each one of these movements shares some part in common and other parts not, but they form a web, a family resemblance. So for instance, some share strongly in the sense of regeneration as a uniquely Christian moment, one of bringing, quote, civilization, which is a cipher for a particular type of white Christianity, to a, quote, uncivilized land. Yet another holds the value of individualism in social structures that count the cis-hetero relationship as a basic organizing block of individual freedom. The sort of sense that the household is this reproductive microcosm that is and ought to be self-sufficient. The frontier gun connection also helps us understand why meaningful gun reform has failed. We know that the leading cause of death for children in this country is gun violence. We know that countries who enact specific limits on gun ownership significantly reduce the amount of overall violence. And still, in light of these facts, a strange coalition of groups have significantly pushed back to change. And too often our analysis stops here. We often stop at hypocrisy or rationality, and it makes me feel hopeless at those moments, right? Like, how many more facts do we need? How much more reason do we need? How many more bodies do we need? I don't necessarily think that pointing at hypocrisy is an effective political or spiritual tool for change. Unveiling hypocrisy alone does not work. It's just not enough to be right. That doesn't mean that we should abandon the process of finding the contradictions, but in finding those contradictions, find where they point us to meaningful openings for transformation. So what do I mean by this? Well, I look back at the roots of frontier gun world. When we talk about increased incidents of gun violence, we are triggering those concepts of individualism. We say, look how dangerous having this many guns is. But that is translated through the frontier into no one can protect you. It's the Wild West out there. Good thing you have that gun. The coalition of folks who this trigger applies is not just gun enthusiasts. Anyone who is suspicious of public institutions, for whatever reason, also find the hook. Schools can't teach your children proper values, only you can. Civic society cannot be built to create a cooperative safety net. Only you can take care of yourself. When we talk about other countries who have laws around gun ownership and the drastic reduction in homicide, that triggers the regeneration concept. Who we are is not Britain. We're not Europe. America's greatness, its exceptionalism lies in regeneration through violence, through its conquering this continent. I mean, we are like the Europeans, but there is a break in history, a wide ocean, and that makes us something different. Analyzed and scrutinized and reasoned through, these statements of pro-gun advocacy are thin and brittle, but the clean rooms of analytical reason is not our lived reality. And the way that information hits us is through the frames that want to affirm particular myths or faiths that we hold. And I say all of this because I believe that Unitarian Universalism was forged in a same fire of the frontier. Unitarians and Universalists are faiths born on the soil of America and lay as much claim to the American identity as the frontier logics we just discussed. UUs, among others, draw upon a deep well of historical practices, and we chart another course. Now, one of my favorite phrases from the Christian Bible comes from Jesus, who says, and I'm paraphrasing, "I have not come to abolish the law, but fulfill it." Now, I don't liken UUs to Christ for a number of what I think are obvious reasons, but I do think that we can potentially say that liberal religion generally, and UUs specifically, have not come to abolish America, but to fulfill it. So this is my response to the contradiction of the logic of the frontier. True, every artifact of human cultural production is an artifact born in violence, but it is also an artifact of hope, and it is our job to distinguish between the two. Where the logic of the frontier sees the American identity as that which is transformed and regenerated through violence, liberal religion sees our spiritual quest as regenerating from violence. All of us, every human, has inherited the traumas of times past. We have all stepped into a world of violence, from the obvious violence of physical force to the subtler violence of institutions of exclusion. The dream of leaving behind the religious oppression and political systems of violence that often mark the American story was not an invitation to export the technology of violence to this continent. It was, and still is, a call to fight violence, to be anti-violent, to generate and regenerate systems and structure that identify our inheritance of violence and metabolize that into projections of justice. The work of anti-racism is one thematic way that we do that in our congregations, but it is more than just that. In our congregational life, we practice generosity to meaningful institutions that share our values. We practice the virtue of democratic governance in all its messiness. That practice helps us so that when bigotry and violence worms its way into our school board meetings and our community boards, it will not be the first time that we have spoken in a democratic forum about what we believe. Our practice of critically identifying even subtle forms of racism, or the violence of the gender binary, or the hostility to people with disabilities built into our public architecture is part of our inheritance of the American identity. And once we recognize this, it becomes easier to see a path toward fulfilling the other aspects of frontier ideology. Freedom is not the ability to do whatever I want to do on my little patch of land. Freedom is the ability to assemble as a community, to fight the forces who want to eradicate our diversity. And it's the messy process of coming to consensus with love in our hearts. Freedom is not the easy pull of a gun trigger, but the difficult process of finding your voice and having that voice heard. The individualism of the single-family landholder melts into the humanism of our faith that recognizes that we are not individuals first, but that our individual wills rise up in a community of love. Now, in our reading today, Ada Limon starts the poem with what I consider an updated version of the words on the Statue of Liberty. And she says, "If the wound you cover is made of sheet metal and iron gates left over from the junkyard of forever worried and the school of always broken, here I have saved you a seat. If you have hidden your outlawed books in your mattress and your outlawed thoughts in your hands, here I will give you refuge. This is what I heard underneath it all. To me, this promise is the hope I heard underneath the frontier, not the conquering of a land through violence, not the walls built on the new frontier of our southern border, not the bulletproof vests on our children or the armed guards in our houses of learning. The hope beneath it is that we can become a sanctuary in a history of violence, a home that holds strong against the trauma, and a faith that centers truth, justice, and most importantly, love. Frontier culture is in crisis. It is threatened on all sides by the corrosive effects of its own ideology and its inability to stand in an age which needs community and love more than ever. Let us strive to be that community of anti-violence, that community where democracy finds its home. In short, a community of loving fellowship. May it be so. I don't know which hymn we're doing, but if you would please rise and body your spirit for hymn number 116, I'm on my way.
Each week, we make an offering from the bounty we are blessed to enjoy. We do this in a spirit of love and generosity, aware that we have benefited from those who have gone before, those who in their turn gave generously. Our offering goes to support the work of love and justice undertaken by this community. Today's offering will also be shared with the Black Diamonds Academic Success Incorporated. For more information, please visit the website bdasinc.org. Please refer to our e-newsletter or website for more information. You can make your donation in several ways. If present in the sanctuary, you may give cash or a check in the offering plate as it comes by. You may also scan the QR code in your order of service. From your homes, you can make your donation via credit card or PayPal using the links provided in the e-newsletter. Please remember to give a little extra to compensate for the 3% surcharge, or if you prefer, you can always mail us a check. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Please join me in the dedication of the offering. The words are in your order of service. May these gifts and the work of our hands and hearts give power to all we stand for as a community of faith. Please also join me in extinguishing the chalice. The words are found in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Our benediction is from the UU minister, Cynthia Landrum. We leave this gathered community, but we don't leave our connection, our concerns, our care for each other. Our service to each other, to the world, and to our faith continues. Until we are together again, be strong, be well, be true, be loving.